Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Patty Porter. My guest hosts, Zena Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening.
Hello, listeners. We all experience common themes which create fights, misunderstandings, and disagreements. Expectations about timeliness, deadlines, hurry-up-and-wait projects, and other time management challenges can lead to conflict between family and friends, coworkers, and bosses. In this episode, Conflict and Productivity, How to Improve Time Management Without Alienating People in Your Life, our special guest, Helene Segura, will address common challenging situations and strategies for addressing them. So who is Helene? Helene Segura helps companies lower employee stress levels, decrease absenteeism, improve retention, and increase profits. She's the author of 2 Amazon best-selling books. Helene has been featured as a productivity expert in more than 100 media interviews, including publications such as U.S. News and World Report and Money Magazine. And she's also been on the television stations of Fox, CBS, ABC, and NBC affiliates. Helene's 3rd book, The Inefficiency Assassin, Time Management Tactics for Working Smarter, Not Longer, was recently released in April of 2016. Tonight we are taking live callers' questions or comments about your time management situation, and we want you to just call 347-324-3591. We also have our chat room open, so if you're listening right now on your laptop or tablet, just scroll down the page, and the chat room is now open. And we also have a live Twitter feed going on. We're using the hashtag ConflictChat, and we will also talk to you there as well. So, Helene, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Patty. I'm excited to be here.
Well, very excited. We've been talking and planning for quite some time. Time management and time issues are often a common issue that I deal with as a conflict coach and mediator. So I'm really excited to actually have a productivity expert and time management expert to talk from your perspective about what some of these challenges are. So why don't we just start with that? What and where do time challenges come from?
Sure. In my view, there are 4 major sources of time challenges, and that would be yourself, work, your family or friends, so I've grouped family and friends, and then also the 4th group, strangers. So for yourself, this is where you feel like you need to do all of these different activities and you keep piling them onto your plate. So that's one source of those time challenges. And then, of course, you have work. A lot of folks are afraid to say no at work if suddenly a whole bunch of projects are dumped on them, or they're not sure how to negotiate. So they're being conflict avoidant. They just want to say yes to everything, and in the end, they end up having just all of their stress levels so much higher because they have way too much going on. And then for family and friends, everybody is approached at one time or another with requests from our family, from our friends. Can you please do this? Can you please help me with that? And especially for nurturers, our tendency is to automatically say yes without checking the calendar, and that just continues to add to our stress levels because we have so many other things going on. And then in the 4th category, we have strangers. Strangers would be folks you meet at events or meetings that you're going to. Perhaps you're going to a PTA meeting or a networking meeting, and somebody comes up to you and asks, would you like to do this? And a lot of folks don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and so the first answer out of their mouth is yes, and they just yet again, added to their time challenges. So those are the four main places where our time challenges come from.
Well, I bet you the majority of our listeners, probably even 100%, I could even say that we've all been in that place where we have felt overwhelmed, felt obligated to say yes when we really should be saying no. And not only does it provide those challenges, but oftentimes the conflict that might arise from that. So why is there this time challenge for people? Why is it so challenging to say no, for example, or set some boundaries around that? Tell us a little bit more about that from your experience.
Well, one of the huge barriers is that each one of us has a different set of beliefs and a different set of expectations, but we don't always communicate what those are to the other folks in our life. At work, we may be afraid to communicate that to a supervisor. At home, we may just assume that our family understands what our time expectations are. And so by not having this open communication, that's what starts to build up those challenges. So that's why it's really important that we do talk with other people in our life about our beliefs and our expectations. So for instance, if anybody listening is an entrepreneur, you would want to let everybody in your work life and your personal life know what are your work hours. Because if you're working from home, a lot of people will assume, oh, you're not working, you're in your sweats or you're in your pajamas, and they assume they can continue to interrupt you because you're not wearing a suit. But your expectation has been, I'm going to work from my home office from, say, 8 in the morning until 2 p.m., but these interruptions keep happening because you haven't shared those beliefs and those expectations with others who are in your life.
You know, it's really interesting. You know, what comes up for me, well, there were two things that came up for me as you were sharing this with listeners about the expectations. The first thing you said is we have these expectations, and maybe we assume people know what those expectations are, but you said we don't communicate. Sometimes because we make that assumption that people should already know it, or we don't communicate because of some type of fear or anxiety about sharing that. What, you know, something like time, you're thinking, why would that be something that would be cause anxiety or fear to communicate? What are you finding when you're, because you do coaching, you work with a lot of organizations, so what are you finding about your clients that say, well, I haven't communicated that? Why are they not communicating?
They have a fear that they are going to hurt somebody's feelings. So the nice part of them with all of the good manners and the fine etiquette is worried about stepping on somebody else's toes or possibly being offensive. But that's a perception that they have, and they have no idea of how that other person might feel. But their fear of that kind of conflict is what's getting in the way. Or if we're talking about a situation at work, there might be a fear of losing your job or getting demoted or somehow having something negative happen if you share this with a supervisor. So a lot of it has to do with fear, and yet that fear is allowed to overcome themselves, and they are afraid of just expressing their opinion in a polite, assertive way. And what we've discovered is when they rehearse what they need to say to the person, and there's plenty of evidence, it's done in a very business-like manner, nobody's ever offended. They just say, oh, well, thanks for sharing that with me. So it's like, building up this negative expectation of bad things happening from sharing what our expectations are, when most of the time we really don't have the evidence there that's going to support that bad thing happening.
Very good. Now, the other thing you mentioned that was coming up for me is when you talked about our beliefs. And one of them around time, especially when you talk about entrepreneurs or workplaces, is this work ethic, right? People have this certain work ethic that they've defined. And I can remember even years in my career, where you're paid salary, for example, and you're like, you don't quit or you don't end your day until the work is done. You probably heard that phrase many a time. and yet the work is never done, and so people might, be leaving at 8 o'clock at night, and they got a family, and then you have some people who are like, the clock ticks 5, they're gone, and then someone's judging them saying, oh, well, they just, leave at 5 o'clock, they don't have much of a work, they're late, so they start to imply these labels because their work ethic is so different. So I imagine that time challenge around that work ethic around time and contributing time, and that's not just work, but contributing to the PTA. Well, how come she's not donating her time to the PTA or some other community thing that they're involved in? So I imagine that belief really plays a big role in that too.
Yes, and because we're all human and we tend to judge other people, we assume that other people are making those judgments about us. But until we open up those lines of communication, we have no idea of what somebody is thinking. So if we ourselves are judging, wow, that person came in at 9 in the morning and I see them leaving at 4, I have to come in at 8 and leave at 5. I wonder what's going on with them. I guess they're slacking off, or they have it in good with the boss, and so they are allowed to leave. But how do we know that's even happening? And that's yet another disruptor in our day, is when we make those judgments and worry about everybody else and their time, we're actually taking time away from our day. But that, again, the piece that's so important to remember is communication. And so if we're open with everybody who is in our department and talking about, this is what time I'm coming in, this is what time I'm leaving, this is what I'm going to be working on over the next couple of weeks, people will know when they see your deliverables. And then going back to what you opened up with, in this question about how we do always have so much that's going on, and it really is impossible to finish everything in the workday, that goes back to a mindset that we need to have, and to accept that as long as we have a full life, we are always going to have something on our personal to-do list. It is never going to be empty. And as long as we have a full career, a thriving career, we are always going to have something on our work to-do list. It will never be empty. So it's really important to understand that mindset, because if you're trying to cross off all of the 50 million things that you need to get done and trying to do it in one day, you're going to drive yourself into the ground, which is going to raise your stress levels, which also is going to affect how you communicate or don't communicate with those around you, because those stress levels affect what your feelings are and the vibes that you're putting out there to your coworkers or your family members.
Very good. So you've already mentioned just even some examples as we were talking here about, these beliefs and expectations. Let's explore some specific, maybe some common situations that you've seen, and maybe some strategies around that situation. So where do you want to begin?
Would you like to start with workplace and boss, and what happens when the boss dumps things on you?
Yes, that's a great play, because that's a very common one.
Yes, it is. And this is where the fear comes in, because, oh my gosh, it's the boss who has asked me to do this. I can't say no. I can't talk back because I need to pay the mortgage or the rent. I can't get fired. I need this job. So once we step back away from that fear and put on our logical hats instead of our emotional hats, we can look at the situation and say, sir or ma'am, however you normally address your boss, you can say, thank you so much for trusting me with this project. I've looked at my calendar and I wanted to share this with you. You have another project that I'm supposed to finish within the next 2 days. And then you also want this new project done within 3 days. And you know how much I believe in giving 100% and delivering quality work. There's no way that I can finish both within this time period. So how would you feel if I finish Project X by Thursday and Project Y by next Tuesday? And see what the boss says. Because a lot of times the boss doesn't understand what your schedule is, they have no idea of all the other things that you need to do because you just make magic happen. So until this expectation is shared with the boss, they have no idea of how much they're piling on top of you. And so if you state it in a very business-like manner and explain what the benefit is going to be for the boss, if you want me to do this really great job and wow the clients with these projects, this is the time that I need. And the majority of the time, the boss will be completely understanding because it's not like you said, well, gosh, why do you keep dumping things on me? That would not be professional. Instead, you were very logical and explained why you would like to have a certain timeline and what the benefit is going to be. And so through that open communication, then you can avoid conflict and everybody's a whole lot happier because the boss gets quality work and you have less on your plate and you don't feel so crammed for time.
You know, it's really, I like the way that you gave that specific example of how it sounded because there was no blame in what you just said. There was no anger. It was really stepping back, not just stepping back from the fear, but stepping back from having a lot of strong emotion. It was really attacking it from a problem-solving approach and also not dumping it back on the boss, because what I didn't hear you say is, so what would you like me to prioritize? You know, it was really about, I know, here's my recommendation for what I'm suggesting that happens. I do this one on Thursday and this one on Friday. Do you see any issues with me doing it in that priority order? So they're bringing also a recommendation in how that's going to help them manage that expectation, those extra projects. So I like the way how you described that. Now, so listeners, we are at the halfway point in the program. If you're just joining us, I have Helene Segura with Living Order SA, and she is the author of the third book, The Inefficiency Assassin. And what we've been talking about is how where time, expectations, and beliefs around time and how we feel overwhelmed around time can cause conflict, not just conflict, but stress, and actually our productivity goes down when that happens. And so we're talking about real examples and situations where how do you address these situations and challenges without alienating people in your life. So what would be another common example that you've experienced?
How about family and friends?
All right. Well, that's a big one.
Yes, it is. And we can use the same kind of approach with family and friends, except maybe we don't have to be so formal in our language as we were with the boss, but we still need to make sure that we're using non-judgmental language and there's not emotion in it. Everything is logical. Now, you can make it informal by throwing in some nicknames or, oh, dude, I don't know about that. So you can be far more informal, but you want to use the same type of message. Now, with family and friends, there's a different dynamic because the boss is not going to be around you 24 hours a day, and on the weekend, you don't have to live with this person. But with family, if there's any kind of discomfort, you'll have to work your way through that, because you have to live with this person. So that's why people would just rather avoid conflict and not deal with how they truly feel and share those expectations. So what I'd like to do right now is actually share an example of when I initially thought that this procedure backfired on me, but it wound up working out just fine. There was a family member who we had, well, we still have, but at the time the situation was going on, she was constantly calling all the time, always asking for favors, always expecting us to drop things at the last minute and go help out. She would constantly call and dump all of her worries and problems on us. And then when she asked how we were doing, we were about to give an answer, and she'd say, oh, I got to go, I'll call you back, click. And so there was nothing reciprocal in this relationship. But we felt, because this is a close family member who's not in our household but close enough, we would be seeing this person quite often at family gatherings, we were so afraid to say no. My husband didn't want to cause a rift in his family. I didn't want to cause a rift in the family since I was the in-law, or better known as the outlaw. But it finally got to a point where this person is taking up a lot of our time and causing us stress. And so we had to look at the relationship and decide the pros and cons. If we tell this person how we feel and they never talk to us again, what are going to be the ramifications? Because in our mind, that was going to be worst case scenario. And we came up with a very short list of, it will be a little uncomfortable at family gatherings, and that was it. And then on the pros list, we came up with, we wouldn't get called all the time. We wouldn't feel obligated to drop everything. We would get so much more done. We wouldn't have all this stress in our life. So when we started comparing the pros to the cons, we thought, ooh, even though I don't like that con, the pros really outweigh it. And so we approached this person in the same way, explaining how we couldn't drop everything. We couldn't be there for them all the time. And what I learned later was we're basically enabling the person, not allowing them to solve their own problems. And so worst case scenario happened. This person stopped talking to us. And so for the first few weeks, my husband and I are thinking, oh my gosh, this is horrible. We're going to cause this rift in the family. But a few more weeks after that, we started to realize, hey, this is really nice. Nobody's calling us to bug us anymore. We don't have to drop things. We can actually have a life and not worry in the back of our minds, oh my goodness, is so-and-so going to call? Is this time going to be interrupted yet again? And so it actually turned out into the most beautiful thing that we ever did. Was it a little awkward at family gatherings? Yes, but we got over it. I had my glass of wine and I was happy. We haven't been bothered since. So the other family members joke around and say, well, gosh, maybe we should try the same thing because since we don't get called anymore, the others do. And they are still dropping everything for this particular person.
Yeah.
So
it's really, that was the most beneficial thing that you did by really analyzing, right? That kind of like a risk analysis, really analyzing those pros and cons and yet not letting that fear, that high anxiety about the worst case scenario be what makes that decision. You really have that discussion to say, okay, let's, and then be courageous about it and then finally have the discussion. I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you going to say something else about that?
I was just going to say that we finally came to the realization that our happiness needs to come first. And while we try really hard to make other people happy, if we're not happy, then that's not the kind of life we need to live. And that goes back to the belief system that we were talking about in the very beginning. We need to take care of ourselves first, and not in an egotistical way, but a nurturing way. Because if you are running so ragged from helping everybody else, then in the end, you can't help everybody else as well because you're not taken care of. So that's why, like you said, go through an analysis and figure out the pros and the cons of the situation, and also keep in mind your belief, and hopefully a lot of people have this, that your happiness has to come first.
All right. So since you're going in the direction of kind of yourself, in other words, ourselves, what is our happiness around that, and how do we do this kind of analysis and be courageous in this communication? So those are a couple strategies right there in terms of how we're communicating, when we're communicating, what we're communicating about around the expectations. I wanted to ask one more question around the self in particular, which is,
sure.
When someone has, okay, so let me just say, for example, when we have our own hot button around time, right? So, and someone has a different value of time. So, for example, a common example might be you have a friend, I do have a friend actually who has no value or respect for time. In other words, time is not really important. So if you say, hey, let's meet for dinner at your favorite restaurant at 7 p.m. and you get there and you have reservations and they won't even seat you until all parties are there, and you get there at 7 and it's 7:15 and 7:20 and it's 7:30 and you still haven't heard from this person and they're rushing through the door at 7:45 and you're like, oh, thank you for waiting for me, and that isn't a common occurrence. So there's a different value and respect for time. What do you recommend to people, the listeners, about how they manage their anger and their frustration around that?
We talk
kind of that
about,
hot button, if you will.
Right. We talk about the kinds of feelings they have, and actually we start with what is it about the situation that gets under your skin. And what I've discovered is some of the times we have a hot button because we see that somebody else in our life has a challenge that we have, but we take it out on that person because we don't see our own challenges. For instance, I had a client who was so upset with everybody being late to meetings, and this client had the exact same problem. So they were projecting their anger of themselves onto this other person. So that's one set of challenges you need to work with. The other challenge would be, okay, I don't have this same problem, so it's not that I have a self issue, it's this other person who has the issue. This person is always late. And so we either need to come to the realization that we're going to accept this person being late every single time, and we're going to tell them to be at the restaurant by 7. We know they won't show up until 7:30, and so we won't show up until 7:30. Or we can decide to have a sit-down conversation and say, you know how much I love you, but here's the thing. We always make the effort to get here by 7 o'clock, and then we end up having to wait until 7:45. We're always responsible for the table. We're always responsible for the reservations, and we would like you to be here on time with us so we can share this time together. If that will be too uncomfortable for you to do, then you can always let the person know how much total time you have. So, for instance, if you say, we're going to meet at the restaurant at 7, by the way, I need to leave by 8:30. So now if they're choosing to not get to the restaurant until 7:45, you need to keep that hard leave time at 8:30. Because if you don't, you're just telling the person, okay, I'll adjust my entire schedule for you every single time. So that would be the roundabout way.
What a great strategy.
Right. That would be the roundabout way of not, if you're being conflict avoidant and you're hesitant about communicating in full, then that would be one way of the roundabout communication. Set that end time, and when that end time rolls around, you go. And your friend is making the choice of how much time they want to spend with you.
But the key is it's a two-parter. Set the end time and let them know what the end time is. Right? So don't trick them by setting the end time, and then they get there and you're like, oh, by the way, I got to leave at 8:15, right? And then they're mad at you because you're like, well, why didn't you say something? So make sure to do that second part, which is to communicate that end time. So let's talk a little bit about your book, your latest book, The Inefficiency Assassin. You've had a great book launch. You're already well on your way to lots and lots of sales. And not just that, it's really about educating people about these time challenges. What led you to your journey in writing about time challenges and in this book, this strategy?
My passion is helping people find peace in their lives, and I do that through teaching them organizing and productivity skills. And after 10 years in business, what I've come to learn is no matter why a prospective client calls me up for help, whether they say it's paper management or email management or please help me organize my office, please help me not be late, all of that ties back into how they perceive time, how they plan their time. It's all about time management. And whenever I would leave a client's office, they'd say, gosh, I wish I could have you in here with me full time. And that's basically what developed into the book. So the book is all of those different lessons that I've gone over with clients. Some clients have learned all of those lessons. Some clients only needed to learn a few lessons, but they're set up in a teaching manner so that way no matter what type of learning style you have or what situation you're in, you'll be able to pull the information that you need the way it's formatted. So this book evolved from wanting to leave something permanently behind with my clients. So if they couldn't have an appointment with me or they wanted to be much more independent, they would have this book there next to them as basically their encyclopedia of productivity solutions.
What I like about the book is that when you first look at the table of contents, you can quickly, like you said, go to a certain segment. So that's what I like about, going to a certain segment that really appealed to me and my, most angst about time management, and go to that section to learn some strategies right away. So it's very user-friendly in that way that I don't have to sit and read from page 1 to page whatever, toward the end. I could go to very certain segments if I didn't have time to sit down and read the book, you know. So that was wonderful, and how you formatted that to make that very user-friendly for everyone and very quick reference. You did say something. I want to clarify it before we go into our closing, and you said you have a passion to help people find peace. And I found that word interesting. You know, when I think of time management, productivity folks, I don't equate them with peace. And you said about happiness, you know, help you find your happiness and find those boundaries about giving yourself time and happiness around that time. But it was interesting that you said to help them find peace. So what is that for you? What does that mean?
For me personally, peace means that I don't feel frazzled at the end of the day. I can put my feet up at home and relax and not feel guilty and not worry about, oh, I still have a million other things to do. That is put out of my mind. Peace to me is being the manager of my calendar. And I know what I have going on, and I don't feel like I have too much because I've been able to plan it out. It's just being relaxed is such a wonderful state. And I've grown so used to it that I can feel when I'm starting to fall off the wagon because my heart rate is a little faster. I can literally feel my stress level start to rise a little bit. So that's the red flag for me that I need to go back to practicing what I preach and making sure that my calendar isn't too full. And I love the feeling of peace. You know, it's wonderful. Everybody should feel it every day.
Well, you know, I'm glad that you described that and defined that for listeners, because I think we all could wish that we were, you know, laying on the beach or drinking a glass of wine at the end of the day and, I mean, truly relaxing. We all seek that. How do we do more of that in our lives? And so we usually, listeners are used to having our guests give some type of call to action or an assignment for the week, if you will. And so what is their next step to achieving this relaxed state?
What I would love all of the listeners to do is, for tomorrow, I want you to choose the top 3 most important tasks you need to get done tomorrow and schedule them into your calendar for as early in the day as possible. By doing this, if you get interrupted throughout the day, you'll understand what focus you need to go back to. It's those top 3. So if you need to put out a fire or take care of a wonderful opportunity, you go back to that focus. And by blocking time for it, you understand how much time you're going to devote, and that will help you better communicate to other folks when you're not lying. When you say, oh, I'm sorry, I already have another commitment on my calendar, I won't be able to handle this until later. So choose those top 3 for tomorrow, get them scheduled, and if you do this every day, your life will be so much easier.
Oh, I can already hear a listener say, only 3? But I have at least 10. No, 3. So you listen to Helene, their top 3.
Right. I mean, you will have other things to do, but you need to understand what those top 3 are, because when we don't have that focus, we end up going to low-hanging fruit when we want to procrastinate or when we get interrupted, and that low-hanging fruit is not what's going to bring us peace. It's those top 3 that need to get done every day.
Wonderful. Thank you for clarifying that. That's great. Okay, so where can people find you? Is there any particular upcoming trainings, keynotes, any webinar resources for them that you'd like to share at this point?
Why, I would love to share. If the listeners would love to go to my website, theinefficiencyassassin.com. I have all sorts of information there about my book, and if you don't care for reading, you can always look up the webinars because I have the entire book in webinar form, so you can choose which ones will help you. And for those folks who need any time management training, or they're going to a conference and want to get this kind of training or keynote at their conference, they can find my speaking information there as well.
And so let's make sure that with your webinar series, they can go to the webinar series at which website?
They can go to theinefficiencyassassin.com, and it also routes them to my website with my name, HeleneSegura.com. Eventually, you'll get routed to the same place.
Okay. And Helene's last name is Segura, so that's SEGURA.com. Helene Segura, no space, no dash. Or the Inefficiency Assassin, all spelled out, no dashes in there, .com. Of course, you'll find all of her information on the program page at the Texas Conflict Coach, where you can re-listen to this, and she'll also have this on her website as well. You know, Helene, thank you. This is such a common challenge, a common problem that causes a lot of stress and ultimately conflict between those four sources, as you said. So thank you again for being on the program tonight. What final message do you want to leave with listeners?
I would like to say that please remember, time management is all about mind management, and you do have the power to tell your time what to do.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, listeners.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connection or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.